Donald Trump's son, Eric Trump, as well as Bitcoin mega bull Michael Saylor, met yesterday and took this photo together down in Mar-a-Lago, Florida. So, for those of you that don't know, Eric Trump is one of Donald Trump's sons, and Mar-a-Lago is, of course, where Trump resides and where a lot of the meetings with the Trump and incoming Trump administration are happening. So, I think this is a pretty big deal. We're going to talk about not just this meeting, but we're also going to talk about this new $2 billion raise that MicroStrategy is targeting, that MicroStrategy is targeting to raise. I think it's a really big deal, one that we should definitely also talk about in this video, what it means for Bitcoin and what it means for the future of the price of Bitcoin, what it means for the future of the price of MicroStrategy. Because I know that you all watching this, you all want to hear more about MicroStrategy. You all want to hear more about Bitcoin. So we're going to talk about what all these things mean. We're going to talk about this $2 billion new offering that was announced yesterday on Bitcoin's 16th birthday, January 3rd, 2025. And we're going to talk about this meeting. So let's get right to it and talk about this meeting. So this is, like I said, a picture from Mar-a-Lago with Trump's son, Eric Trump, as well as Michael Saylor. It's gotten 23,000 likes so far, of course. And we have Eric's words were two friends, one passion, right? When Eric was speaking over in Dubai a few weeks ago, he was talking about how him and Saylor have been friends for 20 years or so. And this is, just confirming that not only are they remaining friends or at least allied, they are talking about Bitcoin together. And of course, Michael Saylor then replied to that with his own little rocket emojis, right? Now, some people obviously are going to be a bit more negative, right? The people stuck in the last century. But for anyone that's into Bitcoin that understands what's going on, this is obviously something very, very optimistic. Why is it optimistic? Well, this is probably the kind of thing that's going to send Bitcoin to $1 million. Next year, probably not. It's possible. It's possible it goes to $1 million next year. However, I think it's a very low probability, much more likely to take more than 11 and a half months. But at some point in the future, probably what we're going to see is we're going to see the US government begin to adopt a Bitcoin standard, begin to allocate to Bitcoin to defend the dollar. Why is that? It's because when the US government buys Bitcoin, they can weaken the US dollar political currency unit while strengthening the dollar system. That's what the US government needs more than anything. They need the ability to create more currency units while strengthening the entire currency system, right? America needs more energy flowing into the US dollar system to defend our debt, to defend our military, to defend our economy. But at the same time, we want to keep printing dollars because if the dollars themselves individually are getting stronger, that means that it's going to be a massive pressure on credit markets that eventually would result in some sort of big bust. So when I've been talking on here online for years now about Michael Saylor and why you should be watching MicroStrategy, I've been talking about this for years now for a very specific reason. It's not because Michael Saylor has money. It's not because he's rich. It's because of what he's doing at MicroStrategy. I've been saying on here for years now that MicroStrategy is the closest thing we have to being able to understand the nation state game theory of Bitcoin more than anything in the world, right? Because if you look at these two guys, and if we're placing Donald Trump, basically Eric Trump is de facto Donald Trump in this instance, right? Eric Trump is obviously in his dad's ear very frequently, right? Especially when it comes to this upcoming administration. But my point is, when you look at this picture, what you should understand is that there is a lot in common with what Michael Saylor is doing, with what the US government is doing, right? Think of Donald Trump, obviously, as the president of the United States. Think of Michael Saylor as the president or king or monarch or dictator or whatever you want to call it of his country, quote unquote, that is MicroStrategy, quote unquote, right? What is Michael Saylor trying to do? He is trying to strengthen the MicroStrategy share system as a whole. He's trying to increase the market cap of his company while at the same time diluting each individual share individually. He's creating more shares, dumping more shares on the market. He is inflating the number of shares, right? Via obviously, stock splits, but more importantly, creating new stocks, right? He is diluting the number of shares, but because those new shares and their dilution are accreting Bitcoin, that means that the system as a whole is getting more valuable, right? And I've been saying for years, this is exactly what we can expect to see with nation state FOMO, with nation state adoption. All these nations, they want those two things. They want to be able to print more political currency units while at the same time not destroying the system as a whole. And I think that's what we're going to see at some point the US government and many other governments do, right? Donald Trump has been very anti-Bitcoin for years in the past. Why? Because he views Bitcoin and dollars as a zero-sum game, and wanting to support Bitcoin is resulting in the dollar's demise. Now, of course, I think many of you watching this, like myself, agree that the dollar's not going to be around forever. But for somebody like Trump, who is very pro-America, right? That's something that was just not going to jive well with him or his supporters. So he was very vocally against Bitcoin for a very long time. However, I think these kinds of conversations should get you really, really optimistic more than anything else, for that simple understanding that Michael Saylor is literally probably the single most qualified and best person on the planet Earth to help explain Bitcoin, digital capital, to the President of the United States and help orange pill him via Trojan horse and help him adopt Bitcoin, right? Michael Saylor's trying to explain indirectly to the Trump administration that basically if you adopt Bitcoin, you will strengthen the dollar. And guess what? If you strengthen the dollar system, you get to do more as a president, right? You get to be in charge longer. You get to have popularity with more people, right? Because, you want to have, a better standing with the world, right? You want to have better trade agreements. You want to have better everything else, right? And so I think this is going to be a major pivotal moment, whether that happens this year or some future year, is the moment Trump realizes that his real goal is not mass Bitcoin adoption. His real goal isn't, a Bitcoin world like many of you are watching. Trump's main goal is enshrine his legacy, enshrine his name, his bright, big, beautiful, golden, orange plated name into the American history books. That's what Trump wants to do, right? He wants to have his stand. He wants to make America great again. That's his brand. That's what he wants to do, right? And if Trump, for some reason, comes to understand that the fastest way to reach that goal of making a mark on history, a permanent mark in American history, and making American life better and strengthening the dollar under his administration, if Trump were to understand the fast way to do that is with Bitcoin, that Bitcoin and the dollar aren't in a zero-sum game, I think that is the moment where we start to see a massive effort from Trump, right? Because obviously, people can debate whether he understands Bitcoin or not, but I think the conversation is irrelevant. Trump's going to be in office for basically the next 4.5 years, right? Because he isn't even in office yet, right? So Michael Saylor and the Bitcoin world at large has 4 years to try to help Trump understand that. And if at any point in those 4 years he figures that out, I think that's going to be a really, really big deal. This is the kind of thing that I think takes us to a whole new level, right? For all of Bitcoin's history so far, we've been basically playing in the sand, playing in the dirt, right? Trading in, trading out, right? Only with reallocating capital from other assets, right? So far in Bitcoin's history, people have only been able to buy Bitcoin from selling other things, selling dollars, selling stocks, selling real estate, selling gold, selling whatever to buy more Bitcoin. But now we are going to rapidly approach the ability for institutions and, more importantly, nation states to be able to create new capital out of thin air and plug it into Bitcoin, right? Again, that's what we're seeing with MicroStrategy. They're coming up with new paper out of thin air called MicroStrategy shares, and they're plowing it into Bitcoin. And the same thing with governments, I think, is going to be very much the case, right? When we have all these debt burdens coming up down the way, when we have all these demographic shifts coming up down the way, governments are going to need to be able to dilute their own currency more. And the best way to do that is plug it into Bitcoin, because even though you're weakening the currency units themselves, you are strengthening the currency system as a whole, and that is attracting so much energy that way more than makes up for the dilution of the currency units you had individually, right? Same thing with MicroStrategy. You had king, benevolent, dictator, whatever, Michael Saylor in charge of the country of MicroStrategy, diluting all of the corporate currency units of MicroStrategy, the company being MSTR shares, right? You have them diluting all that. However, because it's accretive in Bitcoin terms, it is attracting way more attention from external sources, right? And I think that's what America's going to want to do. As America continues to compete economically with China, with Russia, with many other countries in the world, with the BRICS countries, what are we going to do? We're going to need to print more political currency units, and we're going to back all of them with some degree of Bitcoin, and that dilution is going to be net accretive to US dollar holders. Now, obviously, at some point in the long-term future, the dollar is probably not going to be around forever. But if we're realists, right, if you are watching this, want probably what's closer to the real answer than the hype answer, the real answer is that's probably going to take a very long time, right? At the time of you watching this video, only 60% of the world uses the internet, right? Like nearly half the world doesn't use the internet, right? There are still billions of people without internet, without toilets, without cell phones, or without electricity, right? Like things take a very long time. This idea of a hyper Bitcoinized world, quote unquote, being here the next 5 years, I just don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. Not because I'm a bear on Bitcoin or I'm blah blah blah, whatever. It's just reality, right? It's probably going to take decades. It's not going to take years. However, over the course of those decades, I would rather see this kind of world where the governments are embracing Bitcoin and they have a greater incentive to print more dollars to acquire more Satoshis than printing more dollars to acquire more nuclear warheads. That's the world I would like to see for the next couple decades as we transition from the current world into the future world. And I think that what is going on right now with these meetings between Saylor and between the Trump administration is going to be looked back as a very, very big deal. I think this is super, super optimistic, obviously for Bitcoin at large as an asset, and obviously also for MicroStrategy, because Michael Saylor, I think, knows something that we don't. He is stacking like crazy the last couple months. So let's get into the second topic of this video, being this $2 billion of preferred stock. Okay. Yesterday, January 3rd, 2025, MicroStrategy announced a target of a capital raise up to another $2 billion of preferred stock. Now, the amount is less important, right? $2 billion is, frankly, not that much anymore for them, which is crazy to think about, right? Their first buy of Bitcoin, 4 years ago was not even $1 billion. I think it was $250 million. So, yes, this individual buy announcement alone is 8 times larger than their first announcement 4 years ago. However, $2 billion, isn't moving the needle nearly as much as it used to anymore. But the bigger deal here is not the $2 billion. The bigger deal is the preferred stock. That is a really big deal. Now, instead of this boring, long explanation here, let's go to a Twitter discussion from a coworker and partner, or friend of mine, right? Dylan LeClaire. Another great young guy, great analysis. And, just like myself, he is hyper obsessed on MicroStrategy. In fact, I would say he's way more obsessed on MicroStrategy than myself. But let's break it down and let's go through one step at a time, because I think this is very, very important here and is really the bullish case, not only just for Bitcoin, but also for MicroStrategy. What we're about to read through here, this is how Bitcoin penetrates fixed income markets. This is how Bitcoin penetrates pension funds, insurance companies, all that wonderful stuff, right? And MicroStrategy just happens to be the company in the middle, transferring the money from the fiat world of hundreds of trillions of dollars into this tiny little orange market, which is Bitcoin. So let's go really quickly. Let's go through this discussion here, and go through it, right? So yesterday, right, same day that this photo with Eric Trump is posted, right, Michael Saylor a few hours later posts on Twitter, MicroStrategy is going to have a target capital raise up to $2 billion of preferred stock. Okay, if you want to learn more about preferred stock, highly encourage you to go to Preston Fish's channel where you learn about preferred stock. It's a pretty good video. A perpetual preferred stock. What does that mean for MicroStrategy, the company, and their share price? And what does it mean for Bitcoin as a whole? Okay, and long story short, a perpetual preferred stock is a hybrid financial instrument combining features of debt and equity. It's between bondholders and common shareholders, right? Offering fixed dividend payments with no maturity date. That's pretty important, right? Most of these bonds have maturity dates, right? Michael's able to issue all these 0%, convertible bonds, but they have maturity dates, right? These kinds of perpetual preferred stock does not have a maturity date. It sits between debt and common stock, right? Like I just said, on a company's capital structure, meaning preferred shareholders are paid dividends before common shareholders, but after debt holders. Okay. In the event of liquidation of the company, they also have priority over common shareholders. Preferred shareholders usually lack voting rights, but they benefit from more stable income stream and greater security in dividend payouts, right? Now, why would somebody buy this? Most people that are going to be buying this are buying this because they have to buy it. They can't buy Bitcoin, the commodity. They can't buy MicroStrategy stock, the common stock. They have to have some sort of fixed income instrument within their given fund, charter, or mandate for their fund, right? So a lot of people in Bitcoin may look at this and say, oh, why on earth would I do that? Where it has counterparty risk, where it has all this complexity, when I could just buy Bitcoin self-custody on my own. I highly encourage you to do that. But again, this is a financial product specifically for large funds that don't have the ability to do what you have the privilege of doing, which is taking self-custody Bitcoin. Okay, this kind of financial structure allows companies to raise capital without diluting voting control. That is a really big deal. They can create a crap ton number of these kinds of preferred stock without diluting their own voting power, right? You don't want to give up control, right? Like I was joking before with Michael Saylor being the proverbial monarch or dictator or whatever, MicroStrategy. I know he doesn't literally anymore. I know someday he's going to not have enough voting shares. I know that. But my point is that you don't want to give up that control. The whole value of the business at this point is not the software. The whole value of the business is that they are being the monopoly of securitizing Bitcoin. That is their whole thing. In the process of you trying to become the monopoly of the Bitcoin securitization market, you don't want to give up the control for that and then be voted out of what your own moat is, right? Of your own protection, right? So that's really important. This gives them the ability to just create a bunch more without giving up voting control, right? At the same time, it offers investors a balance of income and relative safety. Okay. The most important thing to understand, in Dylan's opinion, is that as the preferred stock is perpetual, there is no lump sum principal repayment. Okay. There will be an annual dividend, right? And we don't know what that rate is yet, right? It's going to be pulling forward some buying power, but we don't have that lump sum principal repayment at some point in the future. So this is a picture from a Bloomberg terminal. We won't get into that, but this is examples of what we're looking at. Preferred stocks are lower in volatility, which these fixed income funds really want, right? Their whole charter, again, their whole mandate is, create something quote unquote stable in fiat world, right? Create something that can go into these kinds of retirement funds and be sustainable over time, right? So they're looking for upside. They're looking for volatility to the upside, but still they're not looking for the typical volatility of Bitcoin, MicroStrategy, MSTX, or something other degenerate, right? They're looking for more upside than what they currently have, but they can't stomach these major price swings, right? The stock, MicroStrategy stock is down 50% or so in the last 6 weeks or whatever, right? Like it's a very volatile beast, right? So they can't tolerate that much. So for context, there are just under 3,500 issues of preferred stock worth over 7 figures. Average is $500 million per issue, and that is a $2 trillion market in aggregate. Okay, so again, to put this in context, Bitcoin's whole market cap is barely $2 trillion. In fact, it's not even $2 trillion right now. It's ironically probably almost exactly the same amount as, this market here, right? At $95,000 a coin at the time of recording, that's about 1.9 or so trillion. So ironically, it's about the same. My point is that this new market alone is not something we've seen MicroStrategy announce until literally yesterday. People were complaining that, oh man, Michael Saylor is going to crash the MicroStrategy price because he keeps having all this at the money issuance and blah, blah, blah. It's all over. He's run out of options. He's getting desperate. Actually, no, he's not. We just began yesterday tapping a new market that is equivalent in size to the entire Bitcoin market. What happens when you have 1%, 2%, 3% of this new market chasing the remaining 5.5% of Bitcoins left to be bought or sold on exchanges or, liquid, right? Like the math, it doesn't really add up. Bitcoin has to run out of supply at the current price. We will never run out of Bitcoin. The price will just have to reflect upwards. So more specifically, if we narrow it down to parameters that match, MicroStrategy likely targets, there are currently 306 securities that check the following boxes. Okay, exchange listed, perpetual, U.S. listing issuer, just under 400 million average per issuance, 100 billion in aggregate across 306 issues, initial dividend rate of 6%. So the big picture, who is actually in the market for this, right? I'm not in the market for this. You're not in the market for this. Who are actually the people in the suits and the ties in the big buildings in some big city off somewhere? Who are the people that are actually going to be buying this? These are the 4 kinds of markets. Dylan, and obviously I would agree, are going to be the kinds of people interested in this kind of new security, perpetual preferred stock. Insurance companies, pension funds, mutual funds, and banks. I think insurance companies is one of the really, really big ones. I think pension funds is one of the really, really big ones, right? Why? Because pension funds are in very big trouble in the coming decades with a significant percentage of the American population aging, right? We have way too few young people that are being economically productive, right? And this is the horrible curse of fiat, right? Is that it actually gets worse, right? People are having less kids in large part because of the dual income household and in large part because of the fiat system. And those people are being less productive. Why? Because more people my age are nihilistic, are, pessimistic on the future, and are so crippled by student loan payments, medical bills, and other kinds of inflated expenses in life that we're not being as productive. Excuse me, we're not building as many companies. We're just not doing as much, right? And as fortunate as I've been in my, young age, but that's I would argue only because of Bitcoin, right? And so I think it's really, really important that these pension funds begin to allocate to Bitcoin. And this is exactly how they're going to do it. They can't buy Bitcoin on Coinbase and just lock it down, right? They need some sort of security to fit their charter, to fit their mandate, to where they're not violating, where their hands are tied, and they're actually integrating Bitcoin into it the way that is legally allowed for them to do. Insurance companies, I think, is also a very important one. Why? Because Bitcoin is basically a payment-free insurance policy on the global debt system, right, and global currencies. So preferred stock can be held as tier 1 or tier 2 on balance sheets. Here's a chart of what that volatility looks like. So it's definitely volatile, but it's nowhere near as volatile as we would have with typical shares or other kinds of things, right? So if you want to think big picture, again, this goes back to Michael Saylor's Q3 Bitcoin explanation of the various kinds of treasury operations, right? You can think of MicroStrategy stock as a kind of refinery for Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is a commodity. Bitcoin needs to be a commodity. You don't want Bitcoin to be a security. However, for institutions that can only invest or use securities, you need some sort of company to come in the middle and be able to offer those securities. You can't have companies just create their own securities that they use internally, right? You need somebody else to create those securities that's a Bitcoin holding company and integrate them, right? If you have Microsoft or Apple or some other major company offering these Bitcoin securities, or offering these securities that they can create as a company, that doesn't really work. Even though these are large companies, way larger than MicroStrategy, the reality is that the Bitcoin holdings in relation to the rest of their company would be so small that the securities really wouldn't be tracking Bitcoin at all. They'd be more so tracking the iPhone or tracking, whatever other product or software they're doing. But MicroStrategy, because they are almost entirely based upon their Bitcoin holdings, because they're almost entirely based upon their Bitcoin stockpile now, they have cornered that market. And basically, when someone is buying their securities, they are indirectly buying the Bitcoin, right? Because such a high percentage of the value, way over 95% of those are directly tied to the Bitcoin. That's why companies are going to prefer MicroStrategies over other companies, because the percentage is just unbeatable of what MicroStrategy has been able to do. So there are many ways in which they're going to issue these securities, right? We have options, right? Obviously, people are going crazy with options with super high leverage, super high volatility, right? In the same way that the degenerate people want to chase options on Tesla stock or on GameStop stock, right? The people with options are going to chase MicroStrategy, right? And that means, of course, that the hedge funds are also going to want options to be able to offer those options to people or trade on the opposite side of those retail traders, right? Obviously, you have other products like MSTX or MSTU that are trying to get 2 to 3x leverage on top of MicroStrategy share price. Of course, you have MicroStrategy equity, you have the spot Bitcoin ETFs, MicroStrategy convertible debt, MicroStrategy dividend, MicroStrategy fixed. So if we have this ranking here, what this 5x, 3x, 1.5x, 1x is referring to is Bitcoin volatility. So if you're looking for 1x Bitcoin volatility, you go to the spot Bitcoin ETFs. If you're looking for extra volatility, you're looking for the MicroStrategy equity, MSTX, or the most volatile, which would be options, right? And again, what we're looking at here, this announcement here, is on the lower end of the spectrum, the converts, the dividend, and the fixed. That's what we're looking at here. So most of you watching this probably desire to tilt to the higher side of that, even if you maybe shouldn't. But this $2 billion issuance are for the sides that are wanting less than 1x Bitcoin volatility, right? And so maybe you personally may not understand that because you're looking for the volatility, but for a lot of these other entities on the bottom half of that tier, they're looking for more higher returns, which inherently means more volatility than their current basket. However, they can't justify having so much volatility as Bitcoin does, right? So, of course, it's not going to perform as well as, some sort of degenerate options or MSTX or whatever, but that's the whole point. That's not what they're looking for. So preferred stocks are low volatility, low performance, income generating securities. Shown below is the 60-day historical volatility of a preferred stock index. That's up here. There must have been a formatting problem, right? That's what he's referring to here, this chart right here. So again, it is volatile. It does have upside, but not nearly as much as the higher end of the risk curve when it comes to this. There's a very important advantage MicroStrategy has compared to all other preferred issuers. Again, it's that volatility. I know it might kind of sound like a paradox here saying they don't want volatility, but they do want volatility, but that is really what they want here. They want volatility, want more volatility, but restrained and contained volatility, not just excess volatility like crazy, right? So that's what they want. To quote to quote the document that we were just looking at from earlier, right? To quote this document and to quote Dylan quoting the document, the perpetual preferred stock may include features such as convertibility to our Class A common stock. So what that means is that MicroStrategy can provide fixed income investors an indefinite Bitcoin-backed call option. Okay, so doing some math here, let's say the value of those MicroStrategy call options with the market implied volatility of just under 90%, based on a reference price of $330 per share, which is what it is right now for MicroStrategy. That means that there are significant kinds of returns, right? 90%, 80%, 60%, 20%, right? In the future, right? The 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, 20 year expiry. So if we go even further out of the money into the future, the value of a 500% increase, which is a significant increase, that would have a significant increase as well out 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, or 20 years, right? And so the point is that these indefinite call options on a stock with approximately 90% volatility can be super, super valuable for these fixed income investors because the bar is already so low, right? Like if you go to somebody who's making 20% a year and you tell them you can help them make 60% a year, they're going to be really excited. But if you go to somebody that's making, a couple percent a year, single digit percentage a year, and you say that you can do this, all of a sudden that becomes very interesting. You don't need to go all in. You don't need to put your own reputation on the line. If you just move 0.5%, 1% of your funds into this kind of preferred stock from MicroStrategy, all of a sudden the outside returns from that tiny little investment are going to produce way more greater returns than you would have otherwise, right? If you have a portfolio of these large assets, would you rather take 10% of that money and try to chase 6%, or would you rather take 1% of that money and try to chase 60%, right? Especially if your investors are demanding some kind of Bitcoin exposure. Yes, the upside is the same in either scenario, but in the latter scenario, you're only putting 1/10 of the capital on a line, right? So I think this is something that is going to be very, very interesting into the coming year to see what's going to happen, because Michael Saylor knows what he's doing, right? He knows what's coming down the line with the coming administration. He knows what's coming down the line to a relatively clear degree, regulatory-wise. And whoops, that's the wrong slide. He knows that there's going to be demand for these kinds of securities, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't be offering them, right? $2 billion, probably not the end. $2 billion is probably the very beginning and start of this, right? He wouldn't just suddenly issue a couple $1 billion of these or announce the capital raise of a couple $1 billion of these in a brand new kind of security without having an idea already that there is some kind of demand for it, right? It's not just some sort of whim, hey, let's try this. He's doing it because he's pretty confident there's going to be multiple billions of dollars worth of demand for that, right? So the path forward for Saylor and MicroStrategy is selling the volatility of Bitcoin in various kinds, right? Some products, some securities having more volatility than Bitcoin, some securities and products having less volatility of Bitcoin, right? This time with this particular announcement is to preferred stock investors. Okay, it's not debt like its typical previous issuances that has to be paid down outside the annual dividend. It's not like that. So we don't know what the pricing is going to look at. There's a lot more speculations to come. Dylan has a lot more great insights. Highly encourage you check it out. You can go to his Twitter page and find that. Let's see, going to the bottom here, skip it to the end. The long story short of what what this means is that this means that Bitcoin has infiltrated the fixed income market, and MicroStrategy is going to be the Trojan horse to bring them in. And the dreaded uncertainty, aka volatility, that people have been avoiding and making fun of, right, which is typically people's largest pain point, it's going to be obsolete, right? Even if Bitcoin has a lot of volatility in the future, which I hope it does, it's going to be filtered out for these kinds of holders, right? In the same way that MicroStrategy has been doing for the convertibles and for their common stock, right? Some securities have higher volatility than Bitcoin, others have lower. And the point is that MicroStrategy bears have no idea what just hit them. This is a whole new market, multiple $trillion potential market, fixed income market, right? And of course, this means potentially many, many more Bitcoin are going to be bought by Saylor and team. So a lot of exciting things coming up. Obviously, I think this year is going to be really, really exciting year. These things that we're outlining here, this is the way at which Bitcoin hits $1 million. This is the way at which over the next 5 years, it's going to be new massive amounts of capital coming in, right? And maybe you want to trade some altcoin to try to get, more Bitcoin or whatever. But the reality is that, there's nothing else that has all these catalysts coming for it, right? I mean, we have the world's best educator on Bitcoin meeting with the world's most powerful men, right? Donald Trump, and if not him directly, his inner circle and his inner aides, right? The people whispering in his ear over the course of the next 5 years, right? So I think it's a very few exciting years coming up. And I think that we should take every opportunity we can to get as much Bitcoin as we can. And hopefully, we're going to be greatly, greatly rewarded for that. Now, if you're somebody like myself who is not only in Bitcoin because of the money, but also wants to make friendships, make connections, meet new people, see new places, and do all kinds of wonderful things, I'm only talking about this here because it's very related to today's conversation, and that would be the Prague conference in 2025. Prague is one of the biggest Bitcoin cities in the world. What I mean by that is it's a pretty historical city when it comes to Bitcoin. There's a lot of stuff that's been developed there over the years. The Prague conference is a 3-day Bitcoin conference, 2 or 3-day Bitcoin conference, depending on which ticket you get. Last year, I believe they had just over 8,000 attendees. And so what I'm talking about here in this video is the ability for you to get tickets early for that conference right now for a discount, or potentially, and you can join for a special side event retreat and the days surrounding that conference. Okay, you get to explore Prague with fellow Bitcoiners, including myself. We're going to have special guests over for dinner, and we're going to have a beautiful spot with beautiful scenic views of the city, right? One of the most beautiful places in the entire city. We're going to have a hot tub. We're going to have, multiple terraces. We're going to have all that wonderful stuff to where we can hang out. We can get to know each other. We can talk Bitcoin. We can learn, increase your education, increasing your networking. For me, it's a privilege of mine that I get to hang out with so many people and talk to literally people all day, every day about Bitcoin. Every single day, I probably meet a new 5 to 10 people every single day when it comes to Bitcoin. So I'm on one far end of the social spectrum when it comes to Bitcoin. But I know that many people in Bitcoin don't necessarily have the chance to meet other people in real life or digitally when it comes to Bitcoin, right? I know that for a lot of people in Bitcoin, it can feel a bit, not necessarily lonely, but you feel alone. If you know what I mean, right? And so what I'm trying to do with this event is create a kind of smaller targeted event, right? The big conference is wonderful, highly encourage you to go to it. But if you're looking for something a bit more intimate than a mega 8,000 person conference, this private retreat is going to be just about 10 people, maybe 12 or 15, but we're going to keep it pretty small, pretty intimate. Your logistics will be covered. If you want, right? This is why I'm bringing this up. If you want the VIP access, let me know. And with that, you'll have access to meet Michael Saylor, Adam Back, Jack Mallers, and dozens of other speakers. So, obviously nothing's guaranteed, but if you want to meet some of the people actually changing the world, if you want to meet some of these people that are, literally at the core of Bitcoin development, Bitcoin, marketing and Bitcoin progress, highly encourage that you get a VIP ticket, and that you join this retreat because, we're going to probably get a chance to meet him at the main conference. So highly encourage you to do that. And of course, if you're somebody that wants to go to Prague, but it's like you don't know what to see, you don't want to deal with the logistics, you don't want to travel alone, you're worried about this and that and the other, traveling with other people is something that, I think is a lot of fun. I think it adds a lot of, more nuances and fun things with it. I think it's a lot better than traveling alone. So that's another benefit, in my opinion, with this retreat just outside of the Prague conference in June this year, is you don't have to travel alone. I'm doing everything I can to keep it affordable. 1 to 3 grand basically is the cost for it, depending on how many days and other details, which we can discuss on a person by person basis. But roughly, it's a few $100s a day. Maybe $400 to $500 a day, maybe a bit more, again, depending on which combinations you want. But it's going to be, in my opinion, a really good deal because we're going to have luxury experience. I mean, look at these pictures. Like literally, this is one of the best views you can have in the entire city. Luxury experience. We're going to have super high quality guests, super great dinners, private chef, all that wonderful stuff. Text the phone number you see on the screen here if you have any interest in joining me and friends at this Bitcoin retreat in Prague in 2025. And then just a couple more things to add here as we wrap up. Yes, okay, I should mention that too, that this event is first come, first serve. It's just the first people to say they're interested and join are going to be the ones that come, right? Obviously, I'm vetting every single person that's coming, right? Obviously, I know everyone that's coming. We're not just taking in random people, right? So if you have any interest, of applying for that, joining for that. Would love to have you join. You can text the phone number on the screen. The first couple people have already said yes. I've got 2 people that have already claimed it. So, if we're going to have maybe a dozen people, there's only, 10 or so spots left. But whatever the case, if you're going to Prague, highly recommend that event. You can find information in the link in the description below. If you're just looking to go to the main conference, if you're wanting to do this little retreat also, where you get an additional experience other than the conference alone, highly recommend you check it out. Give that phone number a text, and we'll have a conversation about you joining. Would love to have you do that. And that's pretty much all I got. So thank you to you all for watching. Thank you, MicroStrategy, for the work you're doing. Thank you, everyone watching, for doing your part for this Bitcoin journey. And I think this year is going to be very, very exciting when it comes to the price of Bitcoin, the price of MicroStrategy, and the massive narrative shift when it comes to all these pension funds and low-risk institutions all of a sudden plugging in Bitcoin to their balance sheet. I think it's going to be a massive perception shift for people that still view Bitcoin as a high-risk speculation that's probably going to go to zero, right? So thank you for your time. Reach out if you have any interest in joining Prague. If that's first come, first serve, it's probably going to be all booked out within a month or so. So I know June may feel like it's forever away, but believe me, June will be here much faster than we think, and probably $1 million Bitcoin will be here sooner than we think, even if that's not necessarily this year.